Hey guys, just a quick one. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for showing so much support. We're almost at 5,000 subs, so please, if you haven't already, smash that sub button and let's show YouTube that we have the best story community. I love you guys. This is the story of my prankster ex-boyfriend who thought it was funny to completely embarrass me in front of my new coworkers. This thing that happened a while ago, and I still can't get it out of my head. It's not something I ever thought would happen to me, and I still don't know what to think about it. It's one of those things that starts as a joke and spirals into something way darker. It all started a few months ago when I started dating Samir. We met through mutual friends and hit it off almost immediately. He was funny, charming, and had that kind of vibe that made you feel like he was your best friend right off the bat. Everyone liked him, and I was totally into him. To be honest, it felt like I was living in some rom-com. Everything was going smoothly for the first few weeks, but things quickly started to get weird. Samir had this sense of humor. I mean, I get it, everyone's got their thing, right? But his jokes were weird, like a little too much. Not the harmless kind of humor where you laugh and move on. No, his jokes were the kind that made you uncomfortable, but he brushed it off like you were being too sensitive. It's hard to explain, but I noticed it more after we spent some time together. One afternoon, we went to lunch with a few of my coworkers at a local cafe. It was just a casual thing, nothing fancy. I didn't expect anything weird to happen. Samir had already met them a few times, so I figured he'd keep it cool. We were sitting at a big table just eating and chatting. Samir was telling one of his usual stories about something dumb that happened to him at work, and everyone was laughing. It was all good, nothing out of the ordinary. Then, out of nowhere, Samir pulls some stupid prank. Like it wasn't funny at all. He just straight up yanked my pants down in front of the table. Right there. In front of my coworkers. I froze. I couldn't even process what happened at first. 1 second I'm eating my sandwich, and the next thing I know, I'm sitting there with my pants around my ankles in front of my entire work group. I couldn't believe it. The whole table burst into laughter. Samir was laughing hardest of all, like he had just pulled off the greatest thing ever. At first, I thought maybe it was just a bad joke. Like a moment of stupidity that would pass quickly. But then, when I tried to pull my pants back up, Samir was acting like nothing happened. Like it was my problem. Like I was just overreacting. He didn't apologize or even seem to care that I was humiliated. He made a joke about how I needed to lighten up, as if that would somehow make it okay. The whole thing felt unreal. I was sitting there trying to pull myself together, and everyone else was still laughing. I could barely even look at them. Samir didn't get it. He didn't understand why I was upset. It wasn't a funny prank. It was just humiliating. I ended up going to the bathroom to calm down for a bit. My hands were shaking, and I felt this sick feeling in my stomach. When I came back, Samir acted like everything was fine. He even tried to make another joke like I was being some uptight person who couldn't take a joke. The worst part, some of my coworkers were on his side. They thought it was funny too. I don't know if they were just laughing because they didn't know what to do, or if they actually thought it was funny. Either way, I felt like I was the odd one out for not laughing. I didn't know how to handle it. I should have told them to apologize. I should have stood up for myself, but I didn't. I just kept thinking about how embarrassed I felt. My stomach was twisted in knots the whole ride back, and Samir just kept talking like everything was normal, like he didn't just completely humiliate me. Later that night, when we were at his apartment, I tried to bring it up. I asked him why he thought that was funny. I told him how much it bothered me, how it wasn't just a harmless prank. He just brushed it off. He didn't even apologize. Instead, he started telling me how I was overreacting, that it was no big deal, and that I just didn't get his sense of humor. The whole thing felt twisted, like he was trying to make me feel guilty for feeling bad. And honestly, I almost bought it. I started to question myself. Was I overreacting? I spent the next few days feeling off. Every time I saw Samir, there was this weird tension. He acted like nothing happened, and I tried to do the same. But inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I didn't want to seem like a buzzkill, so I pushed it down, telling myself I was just being dramatic. After all, everyone else thought it was funny, right? But the more I thought about it, the more I started to see a pattern. Samir was always pushing boundaries, always doing things that made me uncomfortable. At first, I brushed it off as him being playful or joking around. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't just the pantsing incident. There were other times when he'd touch me in ways I didn't want, or make jokes that crossed the line. He'd say stuff like, "You're so uptight. Just relax," whenever I tried to voice my discomfort. Eventually, I realized that I wasn't just being overly sensitive. Samir's behavior was manipulative. He didn't care about how I felt. He just wanted to have things his way and make me feel like I was the one with the problem. It wasn't about the prank anymore. It was about him crossing boundaries and making me feel small, then turning it around to make me think it was my fault for not laughing along. I didn't know what to do. I had fallen for someone who didn't care about me. Someone who thought it was okay to humiliate me for fun and then gaslight me into thinking it was all my fault. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I broke up with Samir a few weeks later. The hardest part wasn't the breakup itself, it was realizing how much I had let slide. How many times I let him make me feel less than just because I didn't want to make waves. The whole situation was messed up. I still think about that day sometimes. The lunch with my coworkers, the laugh that felt too loud, and the way Samir acted like nothing was wrong. Maybe I should have trusted my gut earlier. Maybe I should have seen the red flags, but I didn't. All I know is that I'll never let anyone treat me that way again. Okay, so I need to get this off my chest because it's been weighing on me for a while. I know you know how to put it into words without sounding like a total mess, but here goes. It started like any other day. I'd been dating Jonah for a few months, and things were going pretty well. At least that's what I thought. He was the kind of guy everyone liked, super charming, funny, good looking, always the life of the party. He made me feel special, and I figured we were pretty solid. We'd been going to the gym together for a while, too, which I thought was great because we had this shared interest, and it was fun to work out together. Little did I know this would end up being the thing that would mess everything up. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and we had decided to hit the gym after work. I remember walking in feeling pretty good, nothing crazy, just a usual session. Jonah was already in his zone, cracking jokes with the trainers, being his usual outgoing self. I didn't think much of it. We had planned on doing some weights, maybe some cardio. I'd been hitting my stride lately with my fitness, so I felt confident. But then, as I was setting up on the treadmill, I noticed him talking to this girl. And at first, I didn't think anything of it. He's friendly, always talking to people, especially at the gym where we know a bunch of regulars. But this wasn't just casual chit-chat. Jonah was flirting with her. Like, I could see it clear as day. His whole vibe changed. His smile was different, and the way he was leaning in all close to her, I don't know, it just didn't sit right with me. And the worst part, she was laughing at everything he said like she was into it. I'm not a jealous person by nature, but this felt off. I kept trying to focus on my workout, but every time I looked over, I saw them talking. Jonah was looking at her like that, and I couldn't stop myself from getting irritated. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting, but something inside me told me that I should be paying attention to what was happening. Then it happened. They finished their little chat, and Jonah turned toward me, giving me this grin that made my stomach twist. He waved me over like nothing had happened. As I walked up, he introduced me to her, but it was clear she wasn't just some random acquaintance. He told me she was new to the gym and that she was looking for some advice on her form. No big deal, right? Wrong. The second she left, Jonah turned to me like it was the most normal thing in the world and said, "I'm going to help her out with her workouts. I think I'll give her my number so I can text her some tips." And in that moment, I froze. I couldn't even process what he just said. My brain was screaming, "Did you really just ask for her number in front of me?" He acted like it was no big deal. I wanted to say something, but it felt like the air was thick. I was too shocked, too thrown off to even react the way I should have. Jonah had always been super attentive, always made me feel secure, but this was different. There was no sense of respect in it, no sense of boundaries. I just stared at him. I mean, what was I supposed to do? He was looking at me, waiting for me to smile or laugh it off like I always do when he pulls this kind of crap. But I couldn't. I wasn't laughing. I wasn't even smiling. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. The more I thought about how he flirted with her right in front of me, asked for her number like it was no big deal, the more it felt like a punch to my gut. When we left the gym, I couldn't stop myself anymore. I snapped. I tried to stay calm, but the words came out sharp, maybe a little too sharp. Jonah just looked at me like I was crazy, like I was making a big deal out of nothing. I asked him why he needed to get her number, why he couldn't just be friendly without it turning into something more. But he just shrugged it off. He kept saying, "It's just for training advice. She's new here and I'm just being friendly, okay?" But I wasn't okay with it. It wasn't just a number exchange, it was everything about it. The way he was acting so casual about it, like he hadn't just crossed a line. And what got to me the most was that I wasn't being unreasonable. I wasn't overreacting. I just didn't want him talking to other girls like that, especially in front of me, especially when we're supposed to be together. I started questioning everything after that. Was this how Jonah acted when he thought I wasn't paying attention? Was this the guy I'd been dating? Someone who could just flirt with whoever and act like it wasn't a big deal. What else was he hiding? I spent the next couple of days feeling off. Jonah kept calling and texting, acting like nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played. It wasn't the first time he'd done something like this, either. There were other moments, smaller ones, where I'd catch him glancing at other girls or talking to them a little too long. I kept making excuses for him, but deep down I started to wonder if I was just ignoring the red flags. Eventually, I confronted him again. I told him how it made me feel when he was so open with his flirting and that asking for her number was crossing a line. He brushed me off. He told me I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust him, but I couldn't trust him anymore. Not after this. Not after everything that had been building up. I'd never really got an apology. It was like he didn't even see what he did wrong. We kept seeing each other for a bit, but things were never the same. The trust I had in him started to erode, and I could never look at him the same way again. It felt like he was playing a game and I was just stuck in it, trying to figure out the rules. Finally, after some time, I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I broke up with him, and as soon as I did, it felt like a weight had been lifted. But I still couldn't shake that nagging feeling. The feeling that I had let someone treat me like that, and for way too long. Jonah wasn't just crossing boundaries, he was disrespecting me, and I should have realized that sooner. I guess in the end, it was just a messed up way to find out the guy I thought I knew wasn't who I thought he was. So this whole thing happened a few months ago, and honestly, I'm still not sure how I got through it. It's one of those things that keeps replaying in my mind like a bad movie I can't stop watching. I don't even know where to start, but I guess it all started when I saw something that I shouldn't have. Pete and I have been dating for almost a year. We met through mutual friends, and at first, everything was great. He was funny, thoughtful, and always seemed so into me. At least that's what I thought. We hang out, do the usual couple stuff, watch movies, grab dinner, meet up with friends. I'd never had any real reason to doubt him. At least not until that day. It all went down on a Saturday. I had just finished work, and Pete and I had planned to meet up for lunch. Nothing fancy, just a casual day. I'd been texting him all morning about what time I'd be done, and he seemed pretty chill about it. So I was looking forward to it. I walked to the cafe we were supposed to meet at, and when I arrived, I immediately saw him, but I also saw something I wasn't expecting. Pete was sitting at a table outside with another woman. Now, before you start thinking the worst, I wasn't jumping to conclusions right away. But there was something about the way they were sitting so close together that didn't sit right. I mean, I could see their hands. His hand was wrapped around hers, and they weren't just holding hands like friends do. They were holding hands like they were a couple. Pete's face had this goofy smile, and she was leaning in, laughing at something he said. I froze for a second. It didn't make sense. We'd been together for almost a year, and I had never seen him act like that with anyone. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there watching them for a bit, trying to process what I was seeing. I kept thinking, maybe it's nothing. Maybe they're just friends or something. Maybe I'm overreacting. But the more I looked, the more it didn't sit right. I felt this sick feeling in my stomach, like I was about to throw up. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't just sit there and let it go. I walked up to the table, trying to stay calm, even though my heart was racing. Pete looked up when I got close, and I could see the surprise in his eyes. The girl quickly pulled her hand away from his, and I saw Pete try to hide his discomfort, like he knew I had caught him doing something he shouldn't. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there, waiting for him to explain himself, but he didn't. Instead of apologizing or acting like he got caught, Pete started acting weird. He looked at me like I was the crazy one, like I was the one overreacting. At first, he didn't even acknowledge what I had seen. He just went on about how the woman was just a friend, and how she needed some advice about something, and that's why they were talking. And then, get this, he said she was like a little sister to him. I didn't know what to say. I felt like I had just stepped into a Twilight Zone episode. I'd just seen him holding her hand like they were in some kind of secret relationship, and here he was acting like it was no big deal. He tried to brush it off like I was being dramatic. I could feel the frustration building up inside of me. The more he kept talking, the more confused I got. He kept saying things like, "Why are you making this such a big deal?" And "She's just a friend, trust me." And that's when it hit me. He wasn't just lying, he was gaslighting me. At that moment, I realized that Pete wasn't going to admit he did anything wrong. He wasn't going to apologize, and he certainly wasn't going to take responsibility. Instead, he was trying to make me feel like I was a problem. He kept repeating how I needed to relax, how I was overthinking everything, and how I was being too controlling. It was like he was planting these little seeds in my head, making me doubt what I had actually seen with my own eyes. I should have walked away right then and there. I should have stood my ground and told him he was lying to my face. But I didn't. I just sat there, feeling confused, angry, and powerless. Every time I opened my mouth to say something, he'd either change the subject or twist the situation around to make me feel like I was crazy. It was like a broken record. I tried to keep my cool. I even told myself that maybe I was overreacting, that I was just being paranoid. Maybe they were just friends. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew what I saw. I knew what was happening. And as much as Pete kept telling me everything was fine, something inside me kept saying, "This isn't right." The rest of the afternoon was a blur. We didn't even end up having lunch together. I just sat there, barely touching my food, while Pete kept trying to act like nothing had happened. He was laughing and joking, as if we weren't sitting in the middle of this awkward mess he had created. By the time we left the cafe, I was feeling completely drained. As the days went on, things didn't get better. Pete kept acting like nothing happened, and I kept feeling worse and worse about it. The more I thought about that moment at the cafe, the more I realized how manipulative he was being. He made me feel like I was in the wrong for even questioning him. And it didn't stop there. He started planting little doubts in my mind about other things too. Every time I caught him doing something that didn't sit right, he'd use the same gaslighting tactics to make me feel like I was the problem. "You're too sensitive. Why are you always looking for drama? You're overthinking this." Slowly, I started questioning my own judgment. Maybe I was making things worse. Maybe I was being too controlling. Maybe he was right, and I was just being paranoid. But after a while, I realized what was going on. This wasn't normal. I shouldn't have to question myself every time something felt off. I shouldn't have to second guess my own instincts. Pete had crossed a line, and he knew it. He just didn't care enough to admit it. I ended things a week later. I couldn't take the gaslighting anymore. The constant manipulation and lies. It was exhausting. And the worst part, he still acted like I was a crazy one, like I was just making everything up. But I knew better. And I knew that I didn't deserve to be with someone who would make me doubt myself like that. I never got closure, never got an apology. But I'm okay with that now. I learned the hard way to trust my instincts, and I'm never going to let anyone make me feel small or crazy ever again. This is something I never thought I'd be sharing, but it's been eating at me for months now, and I still can't believe it happened. It all went down last semester, and honestly, it feels like a lifetime ago, but I can't forget it. I feel like it messed with my brain in ways I didn't even realize at the time. So here goes. I had been dating Mike for a little over 6 months. He seemed cool at first, funny, charming, the usual stuff that gets you hooked. We met through some mutual friend at a party, and the relationship started off pretty chill. But looking back, there were signs that I brushed off at the time because I was too focused on the good parts. I thought I knew him, but the more I think about it, the more I realize I never really did. So this story starts with my student loans. I'm not rolling in cash or anything, but I do have a decent chunk of student loan debt. Like a lot of people, I took out loans to cover tuition, and something I've been trying to manage. Nothing out of the ordinary there. It's a typical part of college life, right? But one night, Mike hit me with this insane request that I still can't get over. We were hanging out in my dorm room, just chilling on the couch, when he suddenly starts talking about money. At first, I thought he was joking or maybe just venting about something. But then the conversation took a turn. It got so uncomfortable that I honestly thought I was hearing things. He asked me if I could give him my student loan money. The way he asked was casual, like it was no big deal. But then he said he needed it to pay off a loan shark. Now, I know it sounds crazy, but at the time I didn't fully process how nuts that was. I was just sitting there trying to make sense of his words because it sounded like something straight out of a bad movie. Apparently, he had borrowed money from some sketchy guy who was now after him. He claimed he couldn't get out of it and that this loan shark would hurt him if he didn't pay up. So he told me the only way out was for me to help him out by giving him the money. I froze. My first thought was, this can't be real. There's no way he's asking me for money this way. But there he was, talking about how serious it was, how the loan shark would come after him, and how I was the only one who could help him. I didn't know what to say. My head was spinning, and I could feel my palms getting sweaty. But then he made it worse. He went on about how he didn't really care if it was my student loan money. It wasn't like it was real money to him. He kept saying things like, it's not like you're using it anytime soon anyway. And that's when I started to feel a sinking feeling in my stomach. Like, this wasn't just about the money. It was about something else. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to help him, but everything in my gut told me this wasn't right. I kept thinking about my future, my loans, and how I was already struggling to manage everything. But the way he was asking, with this mix of urgency and entitlement, made me question if I was just being selfish or if maybe he really was in some kind of trouble. But the more he pushed, the more my instincts screamed at me that something was off. So I reluctantly agreed to give him the money. I transferred it to his account, all $1,500 of it, my student loan money. I was scared, unsure of what would happen next, but I figured this was a one-time thing. I thought maybe once he paid off the loan shark, things would go back to normal. Maybe I was just being overly dramatic, but I didn't feel right about it. A few days later, Mike came over to my door and was acting different. He was way more chipper than usual, almost too happy. I was still processing what had happened, but when I saw him, I noticed something. He was wearing a brand new Moncler puffer jacket, a $1,500 jacket, the exact amount I had just given him. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I didn't want to accuse him of anything. But when he walked in, I couldn't look away from that jacket. It was so obvious. It was the same amount of money. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. I kept my cool for a while, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I looked at him, the more I couldn't ignore it. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to ask him. I had to know what the hell was going on. I asked him about the loan shark, about the money I gave him, and about the jacket. And his response, I still can't believe it. He told me that he didn't actually use the money to pay off the loan shark. Instead, he used it to buy the jacket. He told me he deserved it, that the jacket was going to make him feel better, that he was tired of being broke all the time. And when I asked why, he looked at me like I was a crazy one. He just shrugged and said, it's not your money anyway. It's just student loan money. You're not even gonna use it for years. I felt like I was in a nightmare. I had just handed him my student loan money, trusting that he would use it for something important, something legitimate, and he turned around and spent it on a jacket. A $1,500 jacket. He looked so nonchalant about it, like it was nothing, like I was overreacting. I honestly didn't know what to do. I felt so betrayed. I'd trusted him with something so important, and he had just used it for himself, with no regard for what it meant to me. It wasn't about the jacket. It was about the fact that he had lied to me and manipulated me into giving him that money under false pretenses. I don't even remember how the conversation ended. I just felt numb. It was one of the most disgusting things I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just about the money, it was about how he saw me. How he thought he could take advantage of me, of my trust, like I was just some source of funds for him. The next few days were a blur. I didn't want to see him, I didn't want to talk to him. He tried to apologize, tried to make excuses, but I couldn't listen to any more lies. I realized that I couldn't be with someone who thought so little of me, someone who could be that selfish and entitled. I ended things with him, and honestly, I've never looked back. I still can't believe what happened, but I learned a lot about myself. I'll never let anyone use me like that again. I should have known better, but now I do. It was the hardest thing I had to do, but in the end, it was the right choice. I just hope I don't make that kind of mistake again. So, I have this story about my ex Jake. I still can't believe how everything went down, even though it's been a few months. I guess I should have seen the red flags. But when you're in it, it's hard to see things clearly. Well, I'll never forget the day I found out he had stolen money from my purse. And the excuse he gave. It's still stuck in my head. Jake and I had been together for almost a year. On the surface, everything seemed fine. We'd been spending a lot of time together, hanging out, doing the usual couple things. Dinners, movies, chilling at his place, nothing out of the ordinary. But looking back, I can see how he was starting to change. He became more distant, acting like he was always in a bad mood or something. It was like he was getting restless, but I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was just stress or something. So one day I had to work late, and Jake had the day off. I came home around 9 p.m. to find him in the living room playing some game on his phone. I didn't think anything of it. I walked into my room to drop my bag, and that's when I noticed something weird. My purse, which I always kept on the dresser, was slightly open. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, so I brushed it off. But then I checked it and realized something was missing. Cash. I always kept a bit of money in there for emergencies, maybe $200 or so. It wasn't a huge amount, but I noticed it was gone. I froze. My heart dropped a little because I couldn't figure out what happened. I checked the purse again, but there was no sign of the cash. I started thinking maybe I misplaced it. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind, but I had this gut feeling that something was off. Jake was still in the living room laughing at something on his phone. I tried to shake off the feeling, but I couldn't. It was like this nagging thought that kept eating away at me. What if he took it? I hadn't seen anyone else around, and the last time I used my purse was before I left for work that morning. It seemed like the most obvious answer, but I didn't want to believe it. I tried to be calm, so I went back to the living room and sat next to him on the couch. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I didn't want to accuse him of something without proof, but it was hard to ignore the feeling creeping in. I tried to act normal, but my mind was racing. After a few minutes of sitting there, I casually asked if he'd seen my purse earlier that day. I said something like, "Did you happen to use my purse? I think I'm missing some cash." Jake didn't even look up from his phone. He just said, "No, I haven't touched your stuff." But there was something in his voice that sounded a little off. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or just the way he said it, but it made me suspicious. I decided to let it go for the night and figure it out in the morning. The next day, I went through my purse again. I checked the rest of the room just to see if I'd missed anything, but the cash was still gone. I was getting frustrated now. I wanted to trust Jake, but everything about this felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd taken it, and the more I thought about it, the more I was convinced I was right. I had no solid proof, but I knew in my gut something wasn't adding up. It was a few days later when I finally got the confirmation. Jake came over to my place and was acting way too chipper. It wasn't like him to be so upbeat. He was usually pretty chill, but that day, he was acting like he had something to hide. I didn't say anything at first, but then he started talking about this brand new iPhone he just bought. It was the latest model, one of those super expensive ones. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, we all like a new phone, right? But then Jake started going on about how he deserved the upgrade. He was talking about how his old phone was outdated, how he'd been wanting a new one for ages, and how he didn't really treat himself enough. I asked him how he was able to afford it since he hadn't mentioned any big plans for buying a new phone, and that's when he casually dropped the bomb. "I had to make it happen," he said. "I've been wanting this phone for a while, and no one buys me stuff like this, so I figured it was time. Plus, I've been working hard, right?" That's when it hit me. I didn't even say anything, but I started to piece things together in my head. The timing was too perfect. The money from my purse was gone, and now he was bragging about buying a brand new phone like it was no big deal. My stomach twisted as I put two and two together. He had stolen from me to buy that phone. At first, I didn't know how to respond. I was furious, but I also felt this weird mix of disbelief and shock. He actually went and took my money without saying anything. And then, on top of it, he was acting like he was entitled to it. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew I had to confront him. I asked him where he got the money for the phone, and he gave me this half-ass excuse about finding a way to pay for it. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. He actually told me, "You never buy me anything nice, so I deserve it. I work hard, and I don't ask you for stuff, so I figured it was time I got something for myself." I was in complete shock. I just sat there trying to make sense of his words. He really thought that because I hadn't bought him a new phone, that gave him the right to steal from me. The entitlement was insane. I felt like I didn't even know who he was anymore. This wasn't the guy I'd been dating. This was someone who was willing to cross every line just to get what he wanted, even if it meant betraying someone he supposedly cared about. That was the moment I realized everything about him was a lie. It wasn't just about the money. It was about how he saw our relationship, like he'd take from me whenever he felt like it, and I'd just be okay with it because I owed him somehow. I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't care if we'd been together for almost a year. The trust was gone. I ended things that night. I told him I couldn't be with someone who thought it was okay to steal from me, no matter the excuse. He tried to argue, but I didn't care. I didn't want to hear any more of his excuses. I packed his stuff up and told him to leave. The whole thing left me feeling hollow. I couldn't believe I had let someone like him into my life. I couldn't believe he thought I'd just let him get away with something like that. But I guess that's how people like him operate. They think they can get away with anything as long as they say the right things. I never spoke to him again after that night, and honestly, I don't miss him. I just wish I'd seen it sooner. It was supposed to be a big day for me, the kind of day I had been preparing for weeks. A presentation for work, something that could really push me up the ladder. I had spent hours getting everything just right, perfect slides, the right tone, the best approach. I even got a little extra sleep the night before to make sure I was sharp. Little did I know that sleep would be the last thing I ever get. Jeremy, my boyfriend at the time, had always been chill. He was one of those people who was easy to get along with, always smiling, always acting like everything was fine. But recently, he'd been acting a little off. Not anything obvious, just little things. He started to get more controlling, more manipulative. At first, I thought it was just me overthinking. But now looking back, I see it was all part of something much darker. That night before my presentation, I took my usual sleeping pills. I had a terrible sleep schedule, so they were pretty much the only way I could get rest. I had to be up early for the presentation, and I figured a solid night's sleep would do me good. I usually keep my meds on the counter in a little bottle next to the water, just like I'd done for months. But for some reason, Jeremy had come into the kitchen while I was getting my water. I didn't think much of it at the time. What I didn't know was that he had switched my sleeping pills with something else. Something that would destroy me. The next morning, I woke up feeling off. My stomach was cramping, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just nerves. I had the presentation coming up in a couple of hours, so I didn't have time to really sit with the discomfort. I'd never had issues with my stomach, so I didn't think too much about it. I figured it was just the stress of the day. When I walked into the office building, I could already feel the tension in the air. People were buzzing around, moving fast, getting things ready for the big meeting. I was scheduled to go last, which was great for me. I would be able to see how everyone else handled the pressure. Still, it made me a little nervous. The closer I got to the time, the worse my stomach felt. I started to sweat a little, but I thought, it's fine. I'll push through. I've done this a million times. But by the time my turn came around, I was starting to feel pretty sick. My stomach was cramping like crazy, and I could feel the pressure building in my lower abdomen. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my slides, to stay calm. But my body had other plans. As soon as I got up to present, everything started going downhill. I stood in front of the projector, the clicker in my hand, trying to act cool and composed. But then it hit. A sharp, burning pain in my stomach. I had to clench my jaw to stop from making any noise. But it wasn't the kind of thing you could ignore. No, this felt like I had to go right now. My heart started pounding in my chest. I could feel sweat gathering on my forehead, but I tried to push through, tried to keep talking like everything was normal. The audience, they were looking at me. They were paying attention. I couldn't mess this up. But then, without warning, I felt it. A horrible, uncontrollable pressure in my stomach. My face turned bright red as the cramping intensified. My hands started shaking, and I could feel the heat spreading through my body. I froze. I didn't know what to do. My body betrayed me in that moment, and I couldn't stop. I thought I was going to be able to hold it in, but then there was a sudden, awful release. I couldn't believe it. I just pooped myself during my presentation. The room went dead silent. All I could hear was my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. I looked up, and I swear, every single person in that room was staring at me, their faces a mix of confusion and disgust. I wanted to run. I wanted to hide, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with embarrassment. The smell started to fill the air, and I could feel it, the mess, sitting in my pants like a weight I couldn't escape. The room was still silent, but I could feel their eyes burning through me. My vision started to blur, and I had to grip the podium just to stay upright. I tried to pretend like nothing was wrong, tried to continue with my slides, but my mind was spiraling. I couldn't think straight. I could feel it running down my legs, the wetness, the warmth. I thought I was going to die. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I just walked out. I didn't even finish the presentation. I don't know if anyone even noticed, honestly. I just bolted. I didn't even look at anyone. I ran out of that room, out of the building, into the nearest restroom. I locked myself in the stall and just sat there crying. I couldn't stop shaking when it just happened. How could I have let this happen? I felt so humiliated, so utterly powerless. The thing was, though, it wasn't just the accident that made me feel so awful. It was the fact that it didn't make sense. I didn't have any stomach issues. This had never happened to me before. Then it hit me. I remember the night before. I remember Jeremy coming into the kitchen. I remember the pills. He'd swapped them. He'd swapped my sleeping pills for laxatives. At that moment, everything clicked into place. The cramping, the sudden urgency, the fact that I couldn't control it. It all made sense now. He had done this on purpose. He knew exactly what he was doing, and I had no idea why. I sat there in that stall for what felt like hours, just shaking and crying. I couldn't even bring myself to leave the restroom. I felt like I was in a daze, like everything was happening to someone else. When I finally left the bathroom, I was a mess. My clothes were ruined, my dignity shattered. I couldn't bring myself to face anyone at the office, so I left. I called Jeremy, but he didn't pick up. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what to feel anymore. That night, he came home late. He didn't even apologize, didn't mention what had happened. He just acted like everything was fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Something had changed in him, and I was starting to see it. I wasn't just the person he loved anymore. I was a pawn in whatever twisted game he was playing. I never saw him the same way again. That day broke me in more ways than one, and I'll never forget the way he watched me completely unmoved while I crumbled under the weight of his cruelty. It all started on a quiet Sunday. I had just finished a weekend shift at the local diner and was looking forward to a chill evening. A couple of glasses of wine, maybe a movie, and then a nice long nap. I wasn't expecting what came next. Dominic, my boyfriend of almost 2 years, was acting weird lately. I could tell something was off, but he wasn't saying anything. He'd been distant, cold even, and when I asked him about it, he always deflect or change the subject. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had been bugging me about going through my phone a lot lately. He would ask to see it when I wasn't around or randomly make comments about how much I was texting. It wasn't normal. I wasn't doing anything suspicious, but I could feel myself starting to second guess every text, every conversation I had. One night, I came home from work late, exhausted, and just ready to relax. Dominic was sitting on the couch, staring at his phone. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "Hey," I said, trying to keep things light, but he didn't respond. His eyes were glued to the screen, and I couldn't figure out why. His silence was becoming unbearable. "Dom, what's going on?" I asked, my voice shaky from the tension in the air. He put his phone down slowly and just looked at me. His face was unreadable. I had never seen him like this before. "Why are you being so weird?" I asked again, this time more firmly. He sighed and turned away from me, not saying a word. That's when the bomb dropped. Out of nowhere, he confessed that he had hired a private investigator to look into me. My heart stopped. The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I couldn't believe it. He said he was suspicious, that he thought something was going on behind his back. That's why he had hired someone to follow me around, check my movements, and even get close to me if necessary. At first, I thought I heard him wrong. A private investigator? Really? But no, he was serious. He told me the investigator's job wasn't just to follow me, but to try to seduce me. He thought it would prove if I was cheating or not. And the worst part, he'd already set it all up. The investigator had been watching me for days, and now it was just a matter of waiting for the plan to unfold. I was frozen. I couldn't even think straight. I was flooded with emotions, disbelief, anger, confusion. How could he do this to me? How could he hire someone to invade my life like that? I felt like I was living in some twisted nightmare. The next day, I went out my routine as usual, but something felt off. I had no idea when the investigator would make their move, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if I ran into them? What if I didn't realize who they were? What if I was already being watched and didn't know it? I tried to push the thought out of my mind, but it lingered. Every time I went to work, every time I stepped outside, I felt like eyes were on me. It was paranoia, sure, but how could I not feel that way after what Dominic had done? Then, a few days later, it happened. I was at a local coffee shop waiting in line when a guy walked in who I didn't recognize. He was tall, about my age, wearing a leather jacket and sunglasses even though it was cloudy. I barely even noticed him at first, but then he made his way up to the counter next to me. And that's when it happened, he smiled at me. I smiled back awkwardly, not thinking much of it. But then he started talking to me. "How's your day going?" he asked, his voice smooth, too smooth. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt off. His questions were casual, but they were probing, as if he was trying to get to know me too quickly. I kept my answers short, not wanting to engage, but he didn't seem to get the hint. He made more comments about how nice my hair looked, how my smile lit up the room. It was all too perfect, too rehearsed. Something about it felt like a trap. By the time I got my coffee and started to walk out, I could feel his eyes on me. It was like I was being followed, and for a split second, I thought I was going crazy. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe he was just being friendly. But the way he kept looking at me, it wasn't normal. Later that night, I got a text from Dominic. It was a simple message, but the tone was chilling. "Did you run into anyone today?" I felt a wave of dread wash over me. It was him, the investigator. I didn't answer. Instead, I called Dominic, my voice shaking as I confronted him about everything. I told him I knew what he had done, that I was fully aware of the investigator's job. He didn't seem even remotely apologetic. "I just needed to know the truth," he said, like that was supposed to make everything okay. But it wasn't okay. It felt like a betrayal, like I was a piece in some twisted game he was playing. He didn't trust me, and instead of talking to me like a normal person, he hired someone to spy on me, to try to seduce me. I didn't know how to react, how to feel. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that he had crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. But I couldn't. I just hung up the phone. The next few days were uncomfortable. I went about my life, but everything felt wrong. Every person I met, every interaction I had, I wondered if they were part of Dominic's plan. What if the investigator was still watching me? What if they were still trying to get close? Eventually, I realized that I couldn't stay in a relationship where trust didn't exist, where I wasn't seen as a person, but as some puzzle to be solved with manipulation and deceit. So I ended it. Dominic didn't fight it. He didn't try to apologize. He just let me go. It felt like I was free, but also empty. I realized that love wasn't supposed to feel like a trap, and I'd never make that mistake again. It was supposed to be a fun night out. Sean, my boyfriend at the time, had invited me to a party his friend was throwing, and was honestly kind of excited. We'd been together for a while, and I thought it would be nice to spend the evening with him, meet some new people, and just have a good time. But looking back, I wish I had just stayed home. The party was at some big house on the outskirts of town. The music was blasting, and there were a bunch of people hanging around the yard, talking, laughing, and drinking. Sean had been acting a little distant that evening, but I chalked it up to him just being in a party mood. He wasn't the best at small talk around strangers, but I didn't think much of it. We arrived and found a spot in the backyard. The place was packed, so we had to squeeze through a bunch of people just to get to the table with drinks. Sean went to grab us both something, and I just stood there, looking around at everyone. That's when I saw her. There was this girl standing across the yard by the bonfire. I didn't think much of it at first, but then she started talking to Sean. I didn't even realize he knew her. She was taller than me, with dark hair and a huge smile, and they were chatting, laughing like they were old friends. I wasn't jealous, but it did make me feel a little weird. It's not like Sean was super touchy-feely with me, but seeing him so comfortable with another girl made me feel, I don't know, small, I guess. I brushed it off, though. I knew it wasn't anything to worry about, or at least, that's what I told myself. Sean didn't act like that around other girls, or at least, I didn't think he did. A few hours later, the night got darker. The party kept going, and more people started crowding into the yard. Sean and I were standing by the bonfire when, out of nowhere, he turned to me with this look in his eyes. His pupils were kind of dilated, and he was smiling. I was caught off guard, but I smiled back, trying to be cute, trying to act normal. I didn't think anything was wrong. But then it happened. I felt someone's lips on mine, and it wasn't Sean. At first, I thought it was some sort of mistake. Maybe he was playing around or trying to be funny. But when I opened my eyes, I was kissing someone else. And it wasn't even a guy. It was a girl. I pulled away fast, my head spinning. What the hell? My heart was racing, and I looked around in confusion, trying to figure out what was happening. And then I saw Sean standing behind the girl, his eyes wide like he was in shock, too. It took a second for everything to sink in, but then I realized the girl wasn't me. It wasn't like I was mistaken for someone else either. She had darker skin, completely different features. Her hair was straight, and she had a completely different build. I felt like my stomach dropped out of me. Sean's face turned red, and he started mumbling something, but I couldn't focus on what he was saying. All I could think about was what had just happened. He kissed another girl. I didn't even know how to process it. He tried to explain, but I couldn't listen to him. It felt like the whole world was crashing down on me in that moment. He said he thought it was me, that it was so dark, and he was just trying to find me. But it was obvious he was lying. I could see it in his face. It wasn't some innocent mistake. It wasn't just a quick peck either. He'd actually kissed her like it was nothing. I could feel the anger rising inside me like I was going to explode. But I couldn't figure out what to do. I couldn't just yell at him in front of everyone at the party. But I also couldn't just ignore what had just happened. I turned to walk away, but before I could, Sean grabbed my arm. That's when I realized how much I hated the way he touched me sometimes, like I was his property or something to control. He was trying to hold me there, trying to explain, but I just couldn't hear it. I jerked my arm away from him, and the look on his face was something I'll never forget. It was a mix of confusion and frustration, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't want to cry in front of everyone. I just needed to get out of there. I needed space. I went to the car, not caring that I was leaving him behind. I was furious, confused, hurt. It felt like my trust had been shattered in a single moment. I started the car and sat there for a second trying to breathe. I kept replaying the whole thing over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it. How could he kiss someone else like that? He'd have known it wasn't me. It wasn't just a mix-up. Eventually, Sean texted me, begging me to come back, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that he had thought it was me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying. I couldn't trust him anymore. And the worst part, I didn't even know if I wanted to. The next few days were a blur. Sean kept texting me, calling me, apologizing, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I didn't want to hear his excuses anymore. I didn't want to hear about how dark it was and how he didn't mean to. It didn't matter. He kissed her. He knew it wasn't me, and that's what hurt the most. I ended things with him even though I still wasn't sure what I felt. Maybe I was angry. Maybe I was hurt. Or maybe I was just done. I had to let go. And I did. Looking back, I wish I had trusted my gut sooner. I wish I hadn't brushed off the little signs. But I learned something from that night. Sometimes people don't show you who they really are until you're too deep to back out. And when they do, it hits like a ton of bricks. This might sound crazy, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything that happened. What I thought was a normal relationship turned into something straight out of a nightmare. You never think it's going to happen to you, but then it does, and it's like a slap in the face. It all started when Grom, my boyfriend of almost a year, started acting strange. At first, I didn't think much of it. You know how it is. Guys get moody, busy with work or whatever, and you just let them do their thing. But this time, it was different. He was distant. No late night texts, no casual hangouts, and most importantly, no attention to me like he used to give. For a while, I just let it slide. I tried not to get upset over little things, because I'm not the type to create drama. But then I started noticing weird things around the house. For example, I'd look for my shoes, and they'd be gone. Or my favorite bag, the one I'd saved up for months to buy, would be missing from the closet. I figured I was just being forgetful, or maybe I left it somewhere else. But deep down, I had a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. One afternoon, things really started to click when one of my friends sent me a link to a private Instagram account. At first, I was confused. Who even had a private account these days? But when I clicked on the link, everything hit me like a ton of bricks. The account was full of photos of designer bags, shoes, and clothes that I immediately recognized. Bags I had bought myself, shoes I had worn to special events, items that were once part of my personal collection. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I'd noticed something even worse. Each post was marked with a price. It didn't take me long to realize the items in those pictures were mine, and they were being sold for a lot more than I paid for them. I started scrolling through the account, my heart pounding faster with each item. There were shoes that were once my go-to pair, the ones I had worn to so many dates with Graham. There was my prized Channel bag, The one I'd gotten on my birthday, the one I'd saved up for months to buy. And there it was, right in front of me on some stranger's hands, with a price tag that was double what I'd spent. I didn't even know how to react at first. I felt like I was being punched in the stomach. I mean, how could this happen? Why would he do this? My boyfriend had been selling my things without telling me, without my permission, like it was no big deal. My mind raced as I tried to process everything. I thought about all the times I mentioned to Graham how much I loved those shoes or that bag. I thought about how he'd always complimented me when I wore them, acting like he appreciated them as much as I did. And now this? It was like he had been pretending to support me while secretly cashing in on my stuff. I immediately called him. I needed to know what was going on, but he didn't pick up. I tried again and again. Nothing. That's when I started feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Panic. I kept scrolling through the Instagram account, trying to piece everything together. It was clear that this wasn't some one-time mistake. It wasn't a matter of him just borrowing my things to sell. No, this was a pattern. There were dozens of posts, all showing items that I knew had been in my closet. I clicked on his stories and it hit me even harder. The people commenting on the posts were all talking about how much they loved the exclusive pieces they were buying. I was livid, but I still didn't know what to do. I thought about confronting him in person, but the thought of seeing his face while he lied to me made me sick. So I did the only thing I could think of. I contacted the mutual friends who were following that account. One of them, Mia, was the first to respond, and when she did, I could tell she was just as shocked as I was. Mia told me that Graham had been doing this for months. Apparently, he'd been quietly selling off my items to make a quick buck, and everyone at the party he'd been going to had known about it except for me. She even mentioned that he had been bragging about how much money he'd made off of it. It was like a game to him. Sell the stuff, make the cash, and not have to worry about the consequences. The worst part, Mia said she had even tried to tell me about it before, but she didn't know how. I felt stupid for not realizing sooner, for not questioning his behavior. I had trusted him, but clearly he didn't give a damn about my trust, my belongings, or me. At that point, I knew I couldn't let this slide. I started doing some digging, checking if there were any other accounts or places where he might be selling my things. It didn't take long for me to uncover more than I could handle. Some of the stuff I recognized from old photos, some I didn't even realize was gone until I saw it posted. He'd turned my collection into his side hustle. I had been living in this lie, thinking everything was fine, while he was profiting off me. Eventually, Graham called me back, but by then it didn't even matter. His excuses were weak. He said he was just helping me get rid of things I didn't use anymore. But when I asked him why he hadn't said anything to me about it, why he hadn't asked for my permission first, he just went quiet. He had no real answers. Just a bunch of I didn't think you'd care, and I thought it was no big deal. It wasn't until I mentioned that I was going to report him for selling stolen goods that he started getting defensive. But it was too late. I was done. I blocked him on everything, and that was the last I heard from him. I didn't want to hear his lies anymore. In the days that followed, I couldn't help but feel a mix of betrayal and disbelief. I had been in a relationship where I thought we respected each other, where I thought my things, my personal space, were safe. But instead, I had been living in a relationship built on manipulation and deceit. Eventually, I had to accept that I had been taken advantage of, and that was something I wasn't going to let slide. Graham may have thought he could get away with it, but at least I knew better than to trust him again. My things? They were gone, and there was nothing I could do about that. But my trust in people, that was something I would guard from now on. I never thought my relationship with Zane would go down this path. I mean, he seemed like the perfect guy at first, charming, caring, and so attentive. I thought I hit the jackpot. But as with most things that seemed too good to be true, the cracks started showing after a while. And let me tell you, what I found out about Zane made my skin crawl. It all started innocently enough. He'd get a little jealous when I'd hang out with my friends or talk to guys. I thought it was just a normal boyfriend thing. Everyone gets a little possessive sometimes, right? But then the behavior escalated. It wasn't just about me talking to other people. It was about who I was talking to, how often, and why. He started keeping track of it all. It began one night when I was out with a group of friends in a bar. We were having a great time, just chatting, laughing, and enjoying the night. I didn't think much of it when I noticed my phone was buzzing nonstop. I figured it was just Zane being his usual clingy self, so I didn't think to answer. But the next day, when we were hanging out, he brought it up. He asked me why I hadn't picked up my phone last night. I brushed it off and said I didn't hear it. He seemed to buy it, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. It was like he was watching me a little too closely, almost like he was waiting for me to slip up. At that moment, I thought it was just a weird look, nothing to worry about. But looking back now, I should have known something was off. A few days later, I'd noticed something strange on my phone. It wasn't anything too obvious, just a random folder called Contacts. I opened it and realized it was a list of every person in my phone, friends, family, even acquaintances. But that wasn't the worst part. Each name had a number next to it. It was like a tally system. And then I noticed the columns labeled frequency and time spent. That's when my stomach dropped. I scrolled through the list and saw something even worse. Zane had calculated how many times I'd called or texted each person. He had everything tracked. Every single conversation I had with everyone in my life. How many times I called my best friend Maria, how long we talked. The same for my cousin Jake, my coworker Lisa, even the guy who worked at the coffee shop I liked. It hit me hard. How could he possibly have the time to do this? Why would he be tracking my conversations like this? I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to confront him without making it worse. What could I even say? I wasn't sure if he'd just blow it off or if he'd get angry. I mean, what kind of person keeps a spreadsheet like that? But things didn't end there. Zane got even more controlling in the weeks that followed. He started asking me every single day who I was talking to and what we were talking about. It didn't matter if I was texting my mom about dinner plans or just catching up with my childhood friend. Zane wanted to know everything, and if I didn't answer fast enough or seemed distracted, he'd ask again. It was like he didn't trust me at all. I started to feel like I couldn't breathe. I'd have to double check my texts and calls before I sent them. I had to watch who I hung out with, how much time I spent with them, and even what I talked about. It felt like I was walking in eggshells constantly. One night, Zane came over to my apartment and sat down on my bed, staring at me like he was waiting for me to confess something. I had no idea what he was expecting me to confess. I hadn't done anything wrong. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. He told me he knew I'd been talking to Maria too much lately. I was taken aback. Maria was my best friend, but I didn't think I'd been talking to her any more than usual. He said he'd been keeping track, and that I'd spent over 4 hours talking to her that week. He even listed the specific times we'd talked. That's when I realized the truth. He was tracking my life, calculating every minute I spent doing anything. I tried to stay calm, but inside I was freaking out. I had no idea how to explain myself or get out of this situation. I felt trapped, like I was living in some weird version of reality where I couldn't even talk to my friends without him analyzing everything I said. It felt like he was everywhere in every conversation I had, even in my thoughts. The next few weeks were a blur of arguments and more rules. Zenine started dictating who I could talk to and when. He even tried to make me delete people from my phone. He said things like, "You don't need to talk to so-and-so anymore," or, "Why are you texting him? He's just an acquaintance." It was suffocating. I was starting to lose myself, starting to forget what it felt like to just exist without someone watching me constantly. I could feel my mental health deteriorating. I was anxious all the time, constantly looking over my shoulder, making sure I didn't do anything that would set him off. But the thing that scared me the most wasn't even Zane himself. It was how much he had worked my reality. I started second-guessing everything I did, wondering if I was crazy or if I really was doing something wrong. Then one night, I had a moment of clarity. I had been talking to my friend Amy about Zane's behavior, and she said something that made me realize I couldn't do this anymore. She said, "You're not his property. He's trying to control you, and it's not okay." It hit me like a ton of bricks. She was right. Zane wasn't just being protective or loving. He was controlling every part of my life. He was isolating me from my friends, tracking every move I made, and making me feel like I wasn't allowed to exist outside of his world. That night, I deleted the contact spreadsheet from my phone. I stopped responding to his texts for a few hours. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew I couldn't stay in that toxic relationship. Zane had taken something that should have been beautiful and turned it into a nightmare. It wasn't easy, but I eventually broke up with him. It was hard, really hard, and he tried to manipulate me into staying. But I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let him keep controlling me, keeping me in a cage of his making. I don't know what's worse, realizing how much control he had over me or how long it would go on before I woke up. But I'm done now, and I'm never going back. I never saw it coming. One minute, everything was fine, and the next, I was stuck in this whirlwind of lies, betrayal, and utter disbelief. Dylan wasn't the guy I thought he was. He wasn't even close. It all started when we met at a mutual friend's party. Dylan was charming, funny, and he had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. I fell for him fast, and it wasn't long before we were dating. He seemed perfect. He had a stable job in marketing, loved to travel, and always made time for me, or so I thought. At first, everything seemed like a dream. He was affectionate, attentive, and genuinely seemed to care about my life. But as time went on, little things started to pop up that didn't quite add up. He'd disappear for days, telling me it was for work trips, usually to some exotic location like South Africa, which always sounded a bit random. I'd never questioned it because, well, why would I? People travel for work all the time, right? But then I started noticing some weird details. For one, his business trips were always at the last minute. He'd get a phone call in the middle of dinner and suddenly be gone. Sometimes he wouldn't even tell me until the day before. I tried not to overthink it, but it was hard not to. We were in a relationship, and I was supposed to be a part of his life, right? So why was I always left behind when these trips came up? The first time I really started getting suspicious was when I went to his place to surprise him, only to find his apartment totally empty. It wasn't even a situation where he was just out running errands. His clothes were gone, his toothbrush was missing, and the only thing left in his bedroom was a weirdly expensive watch that I'd never seen before. It wasn't just any watch, it looked like something you'd wear to impress someone, not just a casual item. I asked him about it when he returned, but he brushed it off, telling me he'd left in a rush and forgot some things. I didn't push it. I didn't want to seem crazy or controlling, so I let slide, thinking maybe I was overreacting. But the feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. Things started getting worse the more I tried to ignore it. Dylan's business trips were becoming more frequent. Whenever he left, I noticed he'd leave his phone behind. Normally, I would just assumed he was just being thoughtful, but after that last time with the missing clothes, I felt uneasy. I went through his phone when he was in the shower one afternoon, not looking for anything specific, but just trying to make sense of the weirdness. That's when I saw it. There were dozens of messages from old Wen. Some were recent, others dating back months. But what really made my blood run cold was the context. They weren't just casual messages. They were asterisk intimate asterisk. The kind of messages you send to someone you're close to, someone you love. I didn't recognize the name at first, but when I saw the pictures attached to the messages, I knew. She looked just like me in some ways, but different enough to make me wonder why Dylan was keeping her a secret. The photos weren't even hidden. They were right there in his gallery, like he expected me to find them. I froze. My heart was racing, but at the same time I was numb. I'd seen enough to know what was going on. I still wasn't ready to believe it, though. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe this was also a mistake. I had to talk to him, but I didn't even know where to begin. When Dylan came back later that night, I didn't bring it up. I was still too shaken, trying to wrap my mind around the possibility that the man I'd been dating for the last year had been lying to me. So I decided to do something I never thought I would. I started doing some research. I wasn't just going to confront him without any real evidence. I reached out to one of his coworkers under the pretense of asking for advice on something. It didn't take long before I got the information I needed. Dylan had been flying to South Africa regularly, but not for work. He had another life there. Another wife, another family. My stomach sank when I heard the truth. Dylan had been going to South Africa to visit his second wife and their kids. This entire time, I had been under the impression that he was just going on business trips. But the reality was he had been keeping this other life hidden from me, building it in secret while I sat at home waiting for him. He'd even been sending money back to them. It wasn't just a fling. It was an entire asterisk family asterisk that he had been managing on the side while pretending to be in a committed relationship with me. The thing that haunted me most was how long this had been going on. He had been with me for nearly a year, but he had been with her for even longer. How many times had I thought we were building something real when in reality, I was just another chapter in his long list of lies. I confronted him a few days later. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I had to know the truth. When he walked through the door and saw my face, he immediately knew something was wrong. His eyes darted to his phone, probably thinking I had found out about his little secret. But he was way off. He had no idea that I already knew everything. When I finally asked him about it, he didn't deny it. He didn't even try to lie. He just sat there, staring at me like he was waiting for the storm to pass. I don't even think he was sorry for what he'd done. It wasn't about regret for him. It was about his world falling apart. I asked him why he'd done it. Why couldn't he just be honest with me? But his answers were hollow. He said he didn't want to hurt me. He said it was complicated. He told me things I didn't care to hear. But the worst part wasn't the fact that he had a whole other family across the world. It was how easily he had lied to my face for so long. How he had managed to keep up this charade and made me feel like the crazy one might notice something off. It was the manipulation, the control, the complete disregard for my feelings. I kicked him out that night. I couldn't stand the sight of him anymore. And as I packed up his things and handed him his stuff at the door, it hit me. Everything had been a lie. The trips, the promises, the love. None of it was real. I wasn't special to him. I was just someone he used to pass the time while he lived his life across the world. I didn't want to hear his excuses, and I didn't want to be part of his sick game anymore. He wasn't worth my time, and I wasn't about to let him continue to play me like a fool. So I closed the door behind him, locked it, and didn't look back. It's been a few months now, and I still can't fully understand how I let it go on for so long. How I ignored the signs, how I trusted him when I should have trusted my gut. But one thing's for sure, I'm never going to let someone control me or treat me like that again. I should have known something was off when he first started calling me daddy. It wasn't even like a joke, like when your friends do something weird but you laugh it off because they're messing around. It wasn't like that at all. He was dead serious. At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of weird phase he was going through, but then it just got worse. This whole thing started when we were hanging out at his place one evening, just chilling on the couch. I was sitting there minding my own business, scrolling through my phone while he stared at the TV. He kept glancing at me every so often, like he was waiting for me to say something, but I wasn't really sure what. It was one of those moments where you know something's brewing, but you don't know how bad it's about to get. Then, out of nowhere, he just blurted it out. "Call me daddy." I remember staring at him, confused, trying to process what he just said. I thought he was joking, but his face was all serious. No laugh, no grin, just this weird look in his eyes like he was expecting me to obey or something. I kind of laughed nervously and shrugged it off, hoping it was just a weird joke. But then he said it again, and again, and again. Every time it was like the tone of his voice got more demanding, less playful, more desperate. At first, I just laughed it off, told him no. I wasn't into that, and it felt weird to even entertain the idea. But he didn't stop. He kept pushing, kept asking, his voice growing more insistent, more strange with each passing minute. It felt like he was testing me, like he wanted to see how far I'd go. I kept telling him no, but it didn't seem to faze him. And then, one night, after a really long day, I came over to his place to study. I had this big assignment due for school, and I needed to finish it before the deadline. I figured I could knock it out there and maybe, just maybe, get some peace and quiet. I didn't want to be rude, so I didn't bring it up to him right away. I just sat down at his desk and got to work, hoping he'd get the hint that I needed some space. But no, he just kept hovering around like he was watching me. I couldn't focus. It was like he was waiting for me to say something, to give in. And eventually he did what he always did. He asked me again. "Call me daddy," he said. This time it was like a challenge. I could hear the edge in his voice. He wasn't just asking, he was demanding. I told him, for what felt like the 100th time, that I wasn't going to do that. I was trying to be firm, but it felt like he wasn't hearing me at all. His face twisted a little, like he wasn't sure how to react. Then, out of nowhere, he grabbed the assignment I had been working on and ripped it out of my hands. He stared at it for a moment, then, without saying a word, shoved the paper into his mouth, like actually bit into it. I was so shocked, I just stared at him, watching him chew on it like some wild animal. I tried to grab it back, but he didn't let go. He just kept gnawing at it, like it was some kind of sick joke. The sound of the paper tearing under his teeth, his eyes never leaving mine, made my stomach turn. I was frozen, not sure what to do. I felt a mixture of anger and confusion bubbling up, but I didn't move. I didn't know what to do. "Stop," I finally said, my voice trembling a little. But he didn't. He just looked at me, those eyes still cold, like he wasn't even listening. He tore it up completely, piece by piece, and swallowed it. And then he finally spoke again. But this time it wasn't just about the stupid nickname. It was worse. "You'll call me daddy," he said, his voice low and steady. "You'll call me that, or I'll make you." I was so messed up in that moment. I didn't know if I should scream, cry, or just leave, but I didn't want to cause a scene not there, not in his place. So I just stood there, feeling like I couldn't move, my heart racing. My assignment was destroyed, the thing I'd been working on for days, and it felt like it was just a small piece of everything else he was taking from me. It wasn't just about the paper, though. It was like everything he did after that made it feel like I was losing control of the situation. He kept pushing me, kept making things weird, and it was like he was testing boundaries in a way that was uncomfortable. He kept talking about me submitting to him, about how I should know my place, all while smiling like it was some kind of twisted game. I didn't know how to get out of it. I didn't know how to tell him it was wrong without escalating it. I wanted to leave to walk out, but part of me didn't want to make him mad. I didn't know what he would do if I pushed back too hard. So I stayed. I kept my mouth shut, tried to ignore how bad it was getting, but the whole situation just felt off in ways I couldn't put into words. And then, as if it wasn't enough, he walked over to me, all slow and deliberate, and placed his hand on my shoulder. I flinched, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he gave me that same intense look, the one that made me feel like he could read my mind, like he was playing a game with me and I was losing. At that point, I was so fed up. I wanted to leave, I wanted to scream, I wanted to throw something, but instead, I just stood there, frozen. He stepped back, smirking like he knew exactly what he was doing to me. It was like some sick power play. The whole situation felt suffocating. But I didn't leave. I didn't know how to. And that's when I realized how deep I was in. How far he'd pushed me into this corner, how much control he had over me. And somehow, in that moment, I understood exactly how fucked up it all was. And yet, I stayed. I don't know why I stayed. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was something else entirely. All I know is that from that moment on, things between us changed. I never felt the same around him again. He was no longer the person I thought I knew, and the power he held over me was something I couldn't shake off, no matter how hard I tried. It wasn't about the nickname anymore. It was about control. I was starting to realize just how far he was willing to go to make me feel small. Jermaine had been acting all sweet lately like we were getting closer, and his brother Bayu, who I'd barely met before, was tagging along for the game. They were both so hyped to go, and honestly, I figured it'd be a good time. Little did I know I'd be sitting there alone in a stadium full of people, wondering if I was ever going to get home. It all started when Jermaine invited me to the football game. He'd been talking about it for weeks, getting all excited about seeing his favorite team play. I wasn't really into football, but I figured it'd be a fun date, something we could both enjoy. Jermaine was cool, and even though I'd only been seeing him for a little while, I figured we were in a good place. I was supposed to meet him and his brother at the entrance of the stadium, and everything felt fine at first. They were both already there, standing by the gates, talking about the game and acting like they were best friends. Bay was kind of quiet, but he seemed friendly enough. Jermaine was smiling, his arm slung around my shoulder, making small talk with me like everything was normal. As the game went on, I could tell Jermaine and Bayu were getting more into it. I mean, they were totally absorbed in the game, shouting at the players, cracking jokes, and tossing back beers. But I wasn't really into the whole thing. I sat there trying to follow along, pretending to enjoy myself, but I just couldn't get into it. The crowd was loud, and the stadium lights were way too bright. I tried to keep up with the conversation, but it felt like Jermaine was drifting away from me, lost in the game with his brother. At one point, I glanced over and saw Bayu whispering something to Jermaine, and then they both just started laughing. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured they were just having a good time. But something in me felt a little off. They were too into whatever they were talking about. I didn't think anything was going to go wrong. But then during halftime, Jermaine turned to me with this weird expression. He told me he and Bayu were going to head out to celebrate or something. I was confused at first, but then he casually said they'd be back before the game ended. I didn't understand why they were leaving, but I figured it was a quick thing. Maybe they were just going to grab a drink or something. But they didn't say anything else, didn't ask if I was okay waiting. They just got up and started heading out of the stadium. I sat there watching them go, feeling like an idiot for not speaking up sooner. It was all too sudden, and I thought maybe they were just in a rush. So I waited and waited and waited. It wasn't even that late, still plenty of time left in the game, but I started getting anxious. The crowd was thinning out and people around me were leaving, but Jermaine and Bayu still hadn't come back. I tried texting Jermaine. My messages just sat there, unread. I figured maybe they were caught up in something, so I tried not to worry too much. But then it hit me. I was alone. I was in this massive stadium with no idea how to get home, and I realized they weren't coming back. I started freaking out, trying to find a way out of there, but I had no clue where to go. My phone was at 20%, and I was barely getting a signal. I tried calling Germaine, but the call went straight to voicemail. That's when I started to panic. I couldn't believe this was happening. They had literally just left me there. I walked around the stadium for a while, hoping I'd see them again, but all I saw were other people rushing to their cars, getting on buses, leaving. The parking lot was packed with cars, but there was no sign of Germaine's truck. The only thing I could think to do was try to get an Uber, but my phone was dying and I couldn't get any service to load the app. It felt like hours, but I had no choice but to start walking. I couldn't stay in that stadium. I had to get home and I didn't know what else to do. I started walking down the street, hoping I could find a bus or something. Every time I tried to call, the signal would cut out, and it felt like I was stranded in the middle of nowhere. I kept thinking back to the moment when Germaine and Bayou had left. They'd both acted so nonchalant about it, like it was no big deal, but looking back, it felt wrong. I started getting this sick feeling in my stomach, like they'd planned it all along. They ditched me, and I was left to fend for myself in the dark. After what felt like forever, I finally found a bus stop and managed to get a bus home. It was a long ride, and I kept replaying the events in my head. What had just happened? Why did they leave me there? Was it all just some stupid prank? When I finally got home, I was so exhausted, physically and emotionally, I just collapsed onto my bed. My phone was dead by then, but I plugged it in, waiting for it to charge. I sent Jeremy a message, telling him I was pissed, asking why he left me there. But I didn't get a response. Not right away, not for hours. And when he did finally text me, it was some half-assed apology like he didn't even care. Something about how they'd gotten distracted and lost track of time. It didn't make any sense. I knew it wasn't true. From that day forward, things between me and Germaine were never the same. I couldn't trust him the way I had before. How could I? He had left me stranded in the middle of nowhere without a second thought. His brother Bayo didn't even try to step in. They didn't care about me at all. They had just gone off and had their own fun while I was stuck trying to find a way home. And that was the moment I realized Germaine wasn't who I thought he was. There's this thing people don't tell you about the moment your life starts feeling like it's slipping away from you. Like when you look around and realize that the person you've been trusting most is the one making you feel scared and small. That's what happened with Wayne, and I still can't shake it. It all started when his uncle gave him the gun. It wasn't even the gun that did it. At least not at first. Wayne had always been a little reckless. He wasn't violent, not really, but he loved doing stupid stuff for attention, pulling pranks on his friends, making everything into some sort of show. But when he got that gift, it was like something changed in him. He started carrying it everywhere. At first, I thought it was kind of funny. I mean, you see people with knives or whatever with a gun. That was something else. It sat on his waist, always visible in this leather holster that looked way too serious for someone like him. I guess his uncle had a whole history with guns, and Wayne must have wanted to impress him. It was like he got a taste for this kind of power. He didn't take it seriously, not at first. It was like a toy to him, something to play around with. I didn't even mind the first few days. We'd hang out, walk around the neighborhood, and he'd show it off to anyone who asked. He would pull it out, click the safety off, make jokes about how cool it was. I didn't love that he was carrying it, but I didn't say anything. I figured he'd get bored of it, put it away, and life would go back to normal. But it didn't stop. The more he carried it, the more it seemed like it became a part of him. He'd show it off, constantly adjusting it, pulling it out in public to admire it like it was some new shiny toy. But every time he'd pull it out, I felt more uncomfortable. He pointed at things, usually at the ground or the air, but that didn't make it any better. He'd laugh it off, telling me I was just being paranoid. It's just a gun, babe. Chill out, he'd say. But I didn't want to chill out. I wanted him to just put it away. Then one night, we were at his place, just hanging out in his room. We'd been having a pretty regular night. Nothing too special, just listening to music, talking about random stuff. He had the gun on him like usual, but this time he was doing something that made me really uneasy. He was sitting on the bed playing with it. He wasn't being careful, wasn't checking the safety, just messing around with it like it was some kind of action movie prop. He kept spinning it around in his hand, making these exaggerated pew-pew noises and pretending he was a secret agent or something. I could tell he wasn't being careful. I kept telling him to stop, but he kept brushing it off. "It's fine," he said. "I know what I'm doing." He wasn't even looking at me anymore. He was too caught up in showing off how cool he thought he was. And then, in one split second, it happened. The gun went off. The sound was deafening, like someone had slammed a door shut right next to my ear. I don't even remember fully processing what had happened. I just remember hearing this horrible ringing sound, this high-pitched screech in my ear. I felt my body freeze and I couldn't hear anything. I was still holding onto the edge of the bed, but everything around me felt distant, like I was underwater. It was like the world just stopped. I didn't even know what was happening to me. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even move at first. But then I started feeling this horrible pain in my ear. I touched it, and it was wet. Blood. I could barely hear anything, but I could feel the blood trickling down my neck. I think Wayne panicked for a second, but it didn't feel like he was really there. It felt like I was alone in the room, trapped in this strange quiet while he fumbled around, trying to figure out what to do. I don't know how long it took for him to actually react, but when he finally did, he grabbed my arm, tried to help me up. "You okay?" he asked, but his voice sounded like it was coming from far away. I couldn't even look at him. I couldn't believe what had just happened. He shot the damn gun in my direction. I couldn't understand how he could be so careless. I told him we had to go to the hospital. He didn't argue, but he was still acting like it wasn't a big deal. The entire time, he kept saying things like, "I didn't mean to," or "It was an accident," but his voice didn't sound sorry. It sounded defensive, like he was trying to convince himself it wasn't his fault. I was in shock. I didn't want to think about what could have happened if the bullet had gone a few inches to the left. If it had hit me in the head, but it didn't. It just ruined my ear. I don't remember the drive to the hospital too well. I was too focused on the ringing in my ears and the pain. When we got there, I was rushed in, and the doctors confirmed that my eardrum had burst. It told me it could heal, but it would take time. The worst part, it told me it might never heal completely. I could lose hearing in that ear for good. When I finally saw Wayne again in the waiting room, he was looking at his phone like he wasn't even fazed. He barely looked up when I came out. The doctor's words hit me like a ton of bricks. My ear might never be the same again. But Wayne, he didn't care. It felt like the gun, that stupid gift from his uncle, had taken everything. It was about the ear injury, not really. It was about how careless he had been, how he didn't see the damage that could have happened. It wasn't just an accident. It was a sign of how little he valued anything but himself. I didn't know what to say to him. There was no apology that would make it better. He just sat there, scrolling through his phone, acting like nothing was wrong. I could feel the anger boiling inside of me, but I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. We drove home in silence, and I stayed in my room the entire night. I didn't want to look at him. I didn't want to talk to him. I realized at that moment how much I had underestimated just how dangerous he could be. The gun wasn't the problem. It was him and how little he seemed to care about the people around him. That night, I finally understood that some accidents aren't just about bad luck. They're about the choices people make. And the worst part, I didn't know if I could ever trust him again. It's a weird feeling when you realize someone you trust is talking behind your back. Worse when you overhear them, and everything they say is something you wish you never had to hear. I wasn't prepared for it, didn't expect it, but it happened anyway. And now, even though I can't unhear it, I can't seem to forget it either. So here's how it went down. Daniel and I had been together for a few months. Things seemed fine at first. He was sweet, told me I was cute, and made me feel like I mattered. But then things shifted slowly. At first, I brushed it off, little comments here and there that didn't seem that big of a deal. He would joke about me being a little clumsy or saying I was too lazy to work out. They were always followed by a just kidding or a chuckle. But deep down, it started making me uncomfortable. I kept telling myself I was being sensitive, but it kept adding up. One afternoon, I decided to visit him at his place. I had nothing planned, just thought it would be nice to spend some time together chill. When I got there, he wasn't in his room. I figured he was talking to his friends in the living room or something. He usually did that when I wasn't there, just chatting with them about random stuff. So I went ahead and made myself comfortable, dropped my bag on the couch, and grabbed a soda. I heard their voices, the laughter, but I didn't think anything of it. I walked down the hall toward the living room, figuring I'd say hi and maybe join them for a while. But as I got closer, I heard something that made me freeze in my tracks. It wasn't just small talk. It wasn't just a joke. I heard Daniel's voice clearly saying something about me. At first, it was hard to make out the words, but then it hit me like a ton of bricks. He was talking about me, asterisk to his friends, asterisk, and not in the way I hoped. I don't know what made me do it, but I just stood there in the hallway, pressed against the wall, too shocked to move. I could hear every word. The things he said made my stomach twist. I don't even know what exactly I expected to hear, but it definitely wasn't that. He started talking about how he didn't even like me all that much at first. He said he only went out with me because I liked him a lot, and honestly, he felt kind of bad for me. I stood there feeling like someone had knocked the wind out of me. I couldn't move. My hands were shaking and my mind was racing. He was asterisk embarrassing asterisk me in front of his friends, making me sound like some sort of charity case. And the worst part, they were laughing, just laughing at me. But it didn't stop there. No, he kept going. He talked about how he settled for me. Said I wasn't really his type. Too big for him. Too messy and awkward. I felt like the air was getting sucked out of the room. Each word hit me harder than the last. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't even look at him the same way anymore. All those moments, the dates, the time we spent together, were those just petty gestures? Was I some sort of joke to him? And then I heard him say something that made my heart drop. He said I didn't even asterisk know asterisk how lucky I was to have him, that most guys wouldn't even give me a chance. That stung. It stung like nothing I'd ever felt before. I was trying to hold it together, but my eyes were starting to burn. I didn't want him to see me crying. I didn't want him to see how much it was hurting. His friends didn't even seem shocked. They just egged him on, laughing like it was no big deal. They said things like, "Yeah, you're a good guy for putting up with her, and you're way too good for her, man." At that point, I couldn't stand it anymore. I didn't want to hear another word. I couldn't let him keep talking about me like that. So I just turned around as quietly as I could and walked away. I went straight back to the couch, grabbed my stuff, and left. I don't even know how I made it back to my car. It felt like my legs were made of stone, like I was moving in slow motion. But I knew I had to get away. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't be around him knowing how he saw me, knowing what he'd said. When I finally got in my car, I drove around for a while, not sure where I was going. I just needed to think. I was replaying the whole conversation in my head over and over, wondering if I'd misunderstood something. But I hadn't. I'd heard it. It was real. I wanted to confront him, to scream at him, to ask him why he'd said all those things. But then I realized something. Asterisk, he wasn't going to change, asterisk. I couldn't make him feel bad for what he said because it didn't matter to him. He'd already made up his mind about me. He'd already decided I was less than everyone else. He wasn't worth the effort. I didn't talk to him for the next few days. I didn't even respond to his texts or calls. I felt numb. And then, after some time, he showed up at my place, acting like nothing had happened. He apologized, but it wasn't real. He said he didn't mean it, that he was just joking around with his friends. He said he was sorry I'd overheard it. But that wasn't the point. The point was he thought it was okay to say those things. That's who he really was. And that's when I realized that I didn't want someone who could think so little of me. I told him to leave, and I meant it. I wasn't going to let him back in. I had to face the truth. He didn't respect me. He never had. And now, even though it still stings sometimes, I know I'm better off without him. I don't need anyone who doesn't see me for who I really am. I'm not someone's joke or their pity case. I sure as hell don't need anyone who makes me feel that way. I'm still healing, still working on building my confidence again, but I've learned something important. I'm worth so much more than how Daniel saw me. I'll never let anyone make me feel small like that again. Hey guys, this story is so messed up. Like I tried to forget, but it keeps creeping up in my mind and it feels too unreal to just let go. So here's the story. It started out like any other Saturday afternoon. Me and Havertz, my boyfriend, were at the arcade. We'd been going there for months, just goofing around, playing games, and spending time together. Nothing too out of the ordinary, just us having fun like a couple of teenagers. It was a weekend tradition, and I thought it was one of those things that made our relationship feel solid. That day, we were on a roll. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty good at those claw machines, so when we started playing, I was in my element. But Havertz, he was always the competitive one. He wanted to win me a big prize like bad. I don't think I've ever seen him more focused. He was trying so hard to grab a giant plushie, and after a few attempts, he actually managed to get one. I was honestly impressed. He had this big, goofy grin on his face as he handed it over to me, and it was kind of cute how proud he was. He was like, I told you I could do it. I was stoked. I mean, a plushie at an arcade is basically a huge deal, and it felt like a really sweet gesture. We snapped a couple of photos with it. I was joking around, saying I was going to keep it forever. Things were good, we were laughing, and the day felt just right. That was, of course, until things took a turn. We had walked over to another part of the arcade to play the racing games when I noticed this girl. She was standing near the air hockey table, waiting for her turn. She was pretty, but not in an I'm jealous of you way. Just, someone who was hanging around. But Havertz noticed her too. I didn't think anything of it at first because, whatever, he's a guy and he's not blind. But then, he just walked over to her. Now, at first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just being friendly, talking about the games or whatever. It's an arcade people chat, right? But then I saw it. They were talking for a while. And when I looked closer, I saw that they were laughing together. And that's what happened. They exchanged numbers. I didn't know what to do. I was standing there in complete disbelief. Why was he giving her his number? Why were they so comfortable with each other? My heart was racing and my mind was spinning. Like, was he seriously doing this right in front of me? Was I seeing things? No, I wasn't. It was happening. I didn't want to overreact, so I tried to stay calm. I turned to Havertz, thinking I'd ask him later, but as I watched him, he wasn't even looking back at me. He was too busy joking around with her. I stood there for a moment, just frozen, trying to process what was happening. I thought maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. But the more I watched them, the more it didn't sit right with me. Eventually, he came back over to me, still with that stupid grin on his face. I felt this sinking feeling in my stomach. He was acting like nothing happened, like it was just another casual exchange. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I had to know what was going on, and I couldn't let him walk away like everything was fine. So I asked him about it. I asked him straight up what was going on with the girl. At first, he just shrugged it off, saying something like, she's cool. Just a girl I met here. No big deal. But it didn't stop there. When I pushed a little more, asking why he'd given her his number if it was nothing, he told me, with this calmness that made my skin crawl, that it wasn't my business. He said that I shouldn't care, that it wasn't like we were getting married or anything. I felt my blood run cold. Did he seriously just say that? It was like he wasn't even taking me seriously. Then he turned around and walked back over to her. Yeah, he went back to celebrate with her. He celebrated with the girl he just exchanged numbers with, while I was left standing there, completely ignored, holding a plushie that was supposed to symbolize something sweet and special. And it wasn't even just the fact that he was giving her attention. It was the fact that he didn't care. It was a complete lack of respect. I stood there, still processing everything. I felt like I was watching a movie where the main character was just completely betrayed, and the twist came out of nowhere. But this wasn't a movie. This was my real life. I wanted to leave, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should just walk out and leave him behind, or if I should try to talk to him again. But he didn't make it easy. He didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge the fact that I was hurt. He just kept talking to her, laughing with her, and acting like nothing was wrong. It felt like a slap in the face. I felt like I wasn't even there. I ended up leaving the arcade. I didn't even know where I was going at first, but I just couldn't be there anymore. I was furious, confused, and completely humiliated. I felt like I was invisible to him, like I didn't matter at all. The plushie he won for me, the one that was supposed to be this nice gesture, just felt like a joke now. I tried calling him later that night, but he didn't pick up. I texted him too, but he didn't respond. The silence was deafening. It made me question everything I thought I knew about him. Was he really someone I wanted to be with? Could I trust him? It didn't feel like it anymore. The next few days were a blur. We barely talked. He eventually apologized, but the damage was done. I could see now that he didn't care about me like he said he did. He didn't see our relationship the way I did. He wasn't thinking about my feelings. He wasn't thinking about respect, and he wasn't thinking about us. I'm not even sure why I stayed with him for a while after that. I guess I was hoping things would go back to normal, but they never did. The more I thought about what happened, the more I realized that I deserved better than to be treated like that. I ended things with him a few weeks later. It was hard, but I knew it was the right choice. He was never going to change, and I didn't want to waste any more time on someone who couldn't even give me the respect I deserved. That plushie. I threw it out. It just reminded me of everything that went wrong. I still think about that day sometimes. How it all went down. How I let someone make me feel small. But now I know better. I won't let anyone treat me like that again. Warning to all you arachnophobes. I'm still in shock thinking about it, but I feel like I need to get this out there because it was one of the most disturbing things that's ever happened to me. What happened that night was so messed up. I don't even know how to explain it, but here goes. Thomas, my boyfriend, had always known about my fear of spiders. It's not just a little, oh, I'm scared of bugs thing either. I had a legit phobia. I can't even look at a picture of one without freaking out. It started when I was little. I had an awful encounter with a big fat spider in my room, and it just stuck with me. It was bad enough that I couldn't even sleep with the window open in case one crawled in. I avoided anything related to them at all costs. But Thomas, he thought it was hilarious. I don't know if he really understood the extent of my fear or if he thought it was just some cute thing to laugh about. At first, he'd make jokes about spiders and I just brushed them off, but after a while, I started to get this feeling that he wasn't just joking. He started to bring up my fear more often, almost like he was trying to make me feel stupid about it. I let slide because he's my boyfriend, right? I thought maybe he was just being playful, and maybe I was being too sensitive. But what happened one night, I still can't wrap my head around it. It was a regular night. We were hanging out in my room, watching TV, laughing, just doing our usual thing. It was late, and we were both getting tired, so we decided to head to bed. I didn't think much of it at first. He kissed me goodnight, and we both got under the covers. I was starting to doze off when I felt him get up from the bed. I figured he was just getting a glass of water or something, so I didn't think anything of it. I was half asleep when he came back, and I guess I just fell into a deep sleep right after. I don't even remember how long I had been sleeping, but I woke up in the middle of the night. It was one of those moments when you're still kind of groggy, but you know something's wrong. I opened my eyes and it was pitch black. I couldn't see anything, but I felt something heavy on my face. At first, I thought it was just the blanket, maybe twisted or something, but then I felt something crawling. Like crawling. Slowly, and I could feel every tiny movement. My heart dropped. I tried to brush it away, but I couldn't move. It was like my body froze, and I could only feel it, this thing, whatever it was, slowly moving around my face. I thought I was dreaming. I tried to shake my head, thinking maybe it was just a nightmare, but it didn't stop. That's when I felt the sharp little legs. It felt like hairy legs, like the kind of texture I had only ever imagined in my worst nightmares. I screamed. I really screamed. I threw myself off the bed, flipping the blanket off and jumping to the other side of the room. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was going to pass out. My hands were shaking as I tried to switch on the bedside lamp. And when I finally got the light on, that's when I saw it. A freaking tarantula, just chilling on my pillow right where I had been sleeping. I couldn't breathe. I was gasping for air, my whole body shaking. I've never been so terrified in my life. That thing was huge, just sitting there, like it was waiting for me to wake up and notice it. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. It was like I couldn't process what was happening. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that it was there or the fact that I had just had it on my face. I wanted to crawl into a hole and never come out. I don't even remember how long I stayed standing there, just staring at it. My mind was racing. Was it real? Did I imagine this? Was I dreaming? But the fear was so real and I could feel my panic rising. I wanted to scream for Thomas, but I was too scared to even move. Finally, I mustered enough courage to grab my phone and I called him. I needed him. I didn't know what to do, and I was too paralyzed to do anything. He came rushing in, half asleep, looking confused. But when he saw the tarantula, he didn't look worried. In fact, he didn't seem concerned at all. He didn't even try to calm me down. All he did was smirk like he was proud of himself. That's when it hit me. He did this. He put the spider in my bed. I was in shock. My mind couldn't even catch up to what had just happened. I started to cry, feeling so completely betrayed. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. He just stood there, watching me like he didn't even care that I was freaking out. When I demanded to know why he would do something like that, he didn't apologize. He didn't show any empathy. He just said that it was his way of helping me overcome my fear. He thought if I was put in that situation, I'd finally learn to face it. But that wasn't it. That wasn't helping me. That was cruelty. He knew how terrified I was of spiders. He knew it wasn't just some silly little fear. He knew it made me freeze up and feel completely helpless. But he didn't care. He thought it would be funny. He thought it would somehow make me stronger. I couldn't believe it. My heart was breaking, not just because I was terrified, but because someone I trusted had done something so vile. I couldn't even look at him anymore. My whole world felt like it was crumbling. I had no idea how to process what had just happened. After that night, I barely spoke to him. I couldn't be around him. I couldn't even be in the same room. Every time I thought about what he did, I felt sick to my stomach. I couldn't believe he thought that was okay. I couldn't believe he thought it would make me better. Eventually, I ended things. There was no going back after something like that. I couldn't be with someone who thought it was okay to manipulate my fear like that. I've been through a lot of therapy to cope with my phobia, and I know I'll get better, but I'll never forget what happened that night. It was a betrayal I never saw coming, and it still haunts me. Wow, I never imagined that a simple Valentine's Day gift would completely ruin my trust in the one person I thought I could count on. It was supposed to be a sweet gesture, a romantic token of affection, nothing more than a cute teddy bear with a rose. But it ended up being something far darker. So let me start from the beginning. It was Valentine's Day, and I was feeling a bit excited. I've been dating Leon for a few months, and while things weren't perfect, I figured this day would be a nice little reminder of how much we care for each other. I mean, it's Valentine's Day, right? If there's ever a day to feel special, it's that one. He came over to my place that afternoon, and when he walked in, he had a big grin on his face. I was a bit surprised when he handed me a big plush teddy bear wrapped in red tissue paper. It was holding a fake rose, the kind you find in a dollar store, but it was cute in its own way. I couldn't help but smile as I took it from him, thinking it was sweet. I even thought it was kind of funny, like something you'd get from a friend or maybe a grandparent, but not something a boyfriend would typically give. But I was happy with it, not expecting anything more. Later that evening, I took the teddy bear back to my place, sat on my bed, and admired the gift. It was soft, the kind of plush toy that you'd hug when you wanted comfort. It seemed innocent enough. I set it down on my bed and then, for whatever reason, decided to take a closer look at it. I'd been a little distracted all day, and now that I was alone, I figured I'd have a minute to appreciate the gift. I didn't notice anything weird at first. The bear was wearing a cute little red ribbon, and the rose it was holding looked fake, but still looked kind of nice. But then something caught my eye. One of the bear's eyes wasn't like the other. It looked off. I leaned in a little closer and realized there was something different about it. It wasn't just an eye, it was a tiny black dot in the middle of the fabric, almost like a camera lens. At first, I thought I was imagining things, so I reached out and ran my fingers over the eye. The black dot didn't feel like part of the fabric. My heart started to race as the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. This wasn't just a cute teddy bear, it was something far more sinister. I turned the bear around trying to find out where the camera might be coming from, but there was nothing obvious. I was too scared to cut it open, but I knew I needed to figure out what was going on. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, inspecting every inch of the bear. That's when I saw it, a tiny wire, barely noticeable, tucked in the back of its head. My stomach dropped. The bear had a camera, a hidden camera, and somehow I knew exactly what that meant. He had put this camera in the bear so he could spy on me. That was the only explanation. At this point, I couldn't stop shaking. I felt sick. My boyfriend, the person I had trusted, had secretly planted a camera in a gift he gave me. I felt completely violated. I had no idea how long the camera had been there or how long he had been watching me. I grabbed the bear, ripped it open as carefully as I could, and found the tiny hidden camera lodged in the stuffing. It was small, almost unnoticeable if you weren't looking closely enough. I felt the tears start to form in my eyes as I realized just how far Liam had gone to invade my privacy. I immediately started thinking about all the times we had been together. Had he been watching me in my own house? Was he recording me while I slept or when I was getting dressed? The idea was unbearable. It felt like everything I knew about our relationship had been a lie. He didn't care about me. He cared about controlling me, about spying on me. How long had he been planning this? I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't bring myself to confront him just yet. My mind was a jumbled mess of confusion and disgust. Instead, I decided to keep the bear hidden for now and gather as much evidence as I could. I had to know how far this had gone. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I spent the next few hours inspecting every inch of the camera. I found a small SD card hidden inside it, which meant that he had probably been recording me for a while. I thought about all the times I had felt uncomfortable in my own home. Times when I changed clothes or done something private and assumed I was alone. I had been watched without my consent, and that thought alone made me want to throw up. After getting all the information I could from the camera, I decided I needed to tell someone. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't just let him get away with it. I had to confront him. It wasn't just about the invasion of privacy. It was about the betrayal, the manipulation. I felt so stupid for not seeing the signs earlier. When I finally confronted Liam about the camera, I wasn't sure what to expect. He didn't seem surprised or guilty at all. Instead, he acted defensive, like I was the one who was overreacting. He said it was a joke, and that I shouldn't be so sensitive. He told me I was making a big deal out of nothing, and that it was just a little prank to see how I reacted. But I wasn't buying it. I couldn't believe the audacity. A prank. What kind of prank involves secretly recording your partner? It was clear to me that he didn't care about me at all. He didn't love me. He just wanted to have control over me. I knew then that I had to get out of this toxic relationship before it destroyed me. I ended things with him shortly after that, and I still can't fully shake the feeling of violation. The trust was gone, and I couldn't bring myself to ever look at him the same way again. I never knew people could be so manipulative, so willing to cross boundaries just for the sake of control. I've thrown the bear away, but sometimes I still can't stop thinking about it. It was supposed to be a cute gesture, but it ended up being a nightmare. I can't even look at stuffed animals the same way anymore without thinking about what happened. I don't think I've ever been so disgusted with someone in my life. It all started with my birthday, and at first I thought everything was going fine. Little did I know it would be the start of me seeing my boyfriend for who he truly was. It wasn't just a gift, or the lack of a decent gift. It was everything that followed that made me realize I had been with the wrong person for way too long. Let me take you back to the day. It was my 22nd birthday, and I was excited. It's not like I'm huge on birthdays, but I thought it would be nice to have a day where the person I loved would show me that he cared. I had been dating Kyle for about a year at that point, and things had seemed fine. He was funny, charming, and we had a lot of fun together. But if I'm being real, the cracks were always there. I'd just been ignoring them. I remember waking up that morning, excited to see what Kyle had planned for me. Maybe a cute dinner or a surprise. I wasn't expecting anything extravagant, just something that showed he was thinking about me. He had told me the night before that he had a special gift for me. I figured it would be something personal, maybe a nice piece of jewelry or something cute. When we met up that afternoon, I could tell something was a little off. He seemed a bit too chill about it all, like he was avoiding eye contact. I shrugged it off. People get busy, right? Maybe he had a lot on his plate. But then he handed me this small, plain box wrapped in cheap birthday paper. I opened it slowly, expecting to be met with something sweet. And then I pulled out a box of paper clips. Yes, paper clips. I don't even know what to say about it. It was like a punch in the stomach. I stared at it, trying to understand. Was this a joke? Like maybe he was pranking me. But no, it didn't feel like that at all. He was just standing there watching me with this look of complete satisfaction on his face. It felt like a slap in the face, and I couldn't figure out if I should laugh or cry. I don't even remember what I said in that moment. I just stared at the box of paper clips, trying to process it. I wasn't mad at the paper clips. I was mad at the fact that this was my birthday gift. Something that was supposed to be thoughtful and personal, and it was just meaningless. It felt like he didn't care at all. But here's the kicker, it wasn't just the paper clips. It was everything else that started to make sense in that moment. Over the course of our relationship, I'd noticed Kyle never really did anything for me, not in any meaningful way. He never paid for anything, not really. He'd let me pick up the check when we went out to eat. When we went to the movies, he always made sure I had my wallet ready, like he was somehow too busy to remember his. I used to tell myself that it was no big deal. Maybe he just didn't have money at the time, maybe he was broke. I wasn't a materialistic person, so I didn't mind picking up the tab now and then. But when I thought about it now, I realized it wasn't just about money, it was about respect. It was about him taking me for granted. I had never once felt like he was really invested in me. And now this birthday gift, this pathetic excuse for a present, was the last straw. He'd spent the last couple of months acting like I didn't matter. I would plan little dates, but he wouldn't seem interested. And if I tried to suggest we do something special for my birthday, he would just brush it off. He never made me feel appreciated. It was like it was just someone to fill the space in his life when he was bored. It wasn't just the paper clips, though. It was how he reacted after I gave him a confused look. He didn't even try to apologize or laugh it off like he knew it was a joke. He just acted like it was normal. He didn't care that I was disappointed, didn't care that it felt like he had put zero effort into making me feel special. He didn't even offer to take me out for dinner or do something nice. Instead, he just changed the subject and acted like I was being dramatic for even caring about the gift. But the real kicker came a few days later when I had a conversation with him about how I felt. I tried to tell him that the lack of thoughtfulness and effort in our relationship was really getting to me. I mentioned the paper clips, how it made me feel like I wasn't a priority, like I was just a convenience for him. I told him that I felt taken for granted. And his response. He told me that it wasn't a big deal, that it was just a box of paper clips and I shouldn't be upset. He said, "It's just a gift. You're making it way bigger than it is." And then he said something that still makes my skin crawl. "You should be thankful I even gave you anything. Most people wouldn't even do that." And that's when it hit me. He wasn't just selfish, he was manipulative. He was trying to make me feel guilty for feeling hurt, for expecting basic respect and consideration in a relationship. It was like he had zero emotional intelligence, and instead of owning up to his lack of effort, he made it my problem. I spent the rest of that day in shock, realizing that I had been ignoring red flags for months. The way he'd always let me do the emotional labor, always let me handle the planning, always let me pay for everything. The box of paper clips was just the final proof that he didn't care. He was never going to change. So I ended things. I stopped reaching out to him, stopped letting him back into my life. I deleted him from my phone, blocked him on social media, and started to focus on myself. Looking back, I can't believe how long I stayed in that relationship, convincing myself it would get better. The paper clips were just a symbol of everything wrong with us. A gift that wasn't a gift at all, just another reminder that I deserved better than to be treated like an afterthought. I'll never forget that birthday, and I'll never forget the lesson I learned about not settling for someone who can't even be bothered to care. I honestly don't even know where to begin with this one. If I'm being real, this was hands down one of the most embarrassing and disturbing experiences I've ever had with my boyfriend. It was supposed to be a simple visit, nothing major, just introducing him to my parents. I thought it would go fine. I mean, how hard can it be, right? You just show up, be polite, and talk about normal stuff. Little did I know it would turn into a disaster I still can't get out of my head. So it all started on a Saturday afternoon. I've been dating Jake for about 6 months at this point, and we've been getting along really well. He was funny, charming, and all that. But when I invited him over to meet my parents, something in me started to get a little anxious. I don't know, maybe it was because I knew he could be a little, well, blunt at times, but I thought it would be fine. I was probably just overthinking it. Jake showed up at my house looking his usual self, like he just rolled out of bed in a hoodie and jeans. It wasn't that he looked bad, but he definitely didn't look ready for a nice family dinner. I told myself I'd let it slide. I wasn't going to judge him on his outfit. It was the vibe that mattered, right? But the moment we stepped through the door, it was like a switch flipped. From the get-go, he was being super rude to my mom and dad, and not even in a joking way. Like actual rude. My mom made a comment about how nice it was that he decided to join us for dinner, and instead of being polite and saying something simple like, "Thanks for having me," Jake shot back with some weird joke about how he didn't have anything better to do and was either dinner with us or watching paint dry. My mom looked uncomfortable, but she smiled it off. I didn't really know how to react. As dinner went on, it didn't get any better. He kept making these inappropriate jokes about my dad's dad bod and laughing like he had said the funniest thing ever. It wasn't even funny. It was just uncomfortable. My dad tried to brush it off, but I could see the tension on his face. Every time Jake spoke, it felt like the room got smaller, like I was suffocating all the awkwardness. I kept glancing at my mom, hoping she'd say something to him, but she stayed quiet. I could tell she was trying to be polite, but I could also see that she was clearly uncomfortable. Jake didn't seem to notice, though, or if he did, he didn't care. He just kept on being, well, Jake. It was like he was trying to prove something, but I had no idea what that something was. Maybe he was trying to be the funny guy, but it wasn't working. Then came the worst part. After dinner, we were all hanging out in the living room, and Jake excused himself to use the bathroom. I didn't think much of it at first. He was only gone for about 10 minutes, which I thought was kind of a long time, but I didn't say anything. When he finally came back, though, he was acting a little too calm, and that's when I started to get this weird feeling, like something was off. I went to use the bathroom right after him, and when I walked in, I immediately knew something was wrong. It smelled terrible. I'm talking about a smell that made me gag. At first, I thought maybe Jake had just, forgotten to flush. But then when I looked in the toilet, I couldn't believe what I saw. The toilet was filled with, well, his mess, unflushed and all. I don't know how anyone could be that inconsiderate, but there it was. I was pissed. I didn't know what to do. Should I clean it up? Should I just leave it? I couldn't let my parents see that, so I did the only thing I could think of at the moment. I flushed and tried to cover it up. I tried to ignore how gross everything felt. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling of disgust. Who does that? Who leaves something like that for someone else to deal with? And worse, who does that in someone else's home? I came back up to the living room, and my face must have said it all. I couldn't even look Jake in the eye at that point. I had no idea how to act. How do you look at someone you're dating when they just made you feel so ashamed? But Jake, he just kept acting like nothing happened. He didn't apologize, didn't mention anything about the bathroom, didn't even acknowledge how rude he had been the whole night. It was like he had no self-awareness at all. He just made a joke about how my dad's TV was too old and changed the subject, like he didn't just make my family uncomfortable all night. I remember sitting there feeling like I couldn't breathe. How had I been so blind to this? I had been with him for 6 months, and I had never seen this side of him before. It wasn't just about the jokes anymore or the bathroom incident. It was everything. He was inconsiderate, selfish, and totally oblivious to how his actions affected the people around him. And what's worse, he didn't care. He didn't care about me or my family or the fact that he'd just ruined a night that was supposed to be special. I spent the rest of the night trying to ignore the tension in the room. I didn't want to make a scene, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. As soon as he left, I broke down. I called my best friend and vented for what felt like hours. She kept telling me to confront him, but I didn't know if I even wanted to anymore. How could I? How do you even talk to someone who's that unaware of the hurt they cause? Looking back, that night was the wake-up call I needed. I realized that I couldn't keep making excuses for his behavior. I had spent so much time convincing myself that he was just joking or that he didn't mean to be rude. But that was the moment I saw Jake for who he really was, rude, selfish, and completely inconsiderate. And the worst part, he never even acknowledged what happened. He never apologized. He just went on acting like it was no big deal. But for me, that night was a turning point. I knew I couldn't keep dating someone like him. That was the last time I saw him.
Thanks for making it to the end. Subscribe to Wide Awake Horror. Please like and share.